My shooters were once alarmed in the Kashmir by the apparition of a wild man, possibly an orang, but I doubt their accuracy. They mistook the creature for a cacodemon or rakshas and fled from it rather than shooting it. It moved, they said, erectedly, was covered with dark hair and had no tail. Published in James Prinsep's Journal of the Asiatic Society in Bengal in 1832, this account by B.H. Hodgson of his experiences in northern Nepal is the first known written account of a strange creature said to reside in that area, one of the most remote and inhospitable regions on Earth, where this creature supposedly thrives. A creature known as the Yeti. By the time the Yeti became known in the West during the early 19th century, it had already been a creature spoken about in legends and folktales in the Himalayas for centuries. In fact, the legend of the Yeti goes so far back that it's even claimed that Alexander the Great heard about it when he arrived at the Hindu Kush in the spring of 1329 BCE. Allegedly, after hearing these stories of this creature, he wanted to see one for himself, so he demanded that one of them be brought to him. At its core, the legends of the Yeti are deeply rooted in many of the communities in the Himalayas, a subject that author H. Seeger writes about in his book The Abominable Snowman. For instance, he was told that the Lepcha people worshipped a glacier being as a god of the hunt. But the followers of an indigenous Tibetan religion known as Bon once believed that the blood of the wild man had use in certain spiritual ceremonies. This wild man was depicted as an ape-like figure that wielded a large stone as a weapon, and it was also known for making a distinctive whistling sound. According to Tibetan traditions, there were two different types of this creature. One that walked on 4 legs and another that walked on 2 legs. This creature would also find its way into Tibetan Buddhism and was considered a non-human being, but one that was still human enough that it was able to follow Dharma. In the region, there are several stories featuring Yetis becoming helpers and disciples to religious figures. The presence of the Yeti in Himalayan communities, as well as accounts of other mysterious creatures, such as Bigfoot, has obviously led to discussions, both who believe that this is nothing but folktales, and also from those who believe that there may be something to these stories. For instance, ecologist Robert Pyle argues that many cultures around the world have accounts of human-like giants. In North America, the creature has been given the name Bigfoot. In European folklore, it often appears as a wild man of the woods. And of course, in the Himalayas, it's known as the Yeti. For the Western world, the legend of the Yeti became more popularized during the 19th and early 20th centuries, when Western explorers and adventurers would travel to the Himalayan region. It was through their writings and their observations of the region that many people in the West would learn of this elusive creature. The passage that I read in the beginning from Prinsep's book is one example. Another account comes from Lawrence Weddell's Among the Himalayas, which was published in 1899. Weddell was a Scottish explorer who traveled extensively in areas on the borders of Nepal and Tibet throughout the 1890s. He would report seeing footprints during his travels. Footprints that his guide would attribute to a large, ape-like creature. He would also hear stories of this creature from the locals, but he wasn't convinced that it was a real creature. In fact, he would speculate that a bear was more likely to be the culprit of the prince. The first mention of the name Abominable Snowman came on the 31st of October, 1921. That year, the British Mount Everest reconnaissance expedition reportedly discovered large, strange footprints in the snow while they attempted to chart a path up to the world's highest peak. Initially, the team suspected that these prints were those of a wolf. But like with previous explorers, local guides believed otherwise and said that the prints were made by a mysterious creature. A creature that was known as the Man-Bear Snowman, the Tlakaelel. When this expedition would return to Darjeeling, a journalist named Henry Newman went to meet with them. When the team mentioned these strange tracks that they had found, Newman would ask for more information, and he was told that they had just found strange tracks that they believed to be from a wolf. But not satisfied with that answer, Newman would speak with some of the porters, who gave a very different explanation for the origin of these tracks. They said that these tracks were made by something they described as a wild man. Deciding that this was the far more interesting story, Newman decided to write about this strange creature. The term the Tibetans used for this creature, Tlakaelel, is generally translated as man-bear snowman or bear-like snowman, depending on which type of creature that they are referring to. Newman would mistranslate the word meto as filthy, which means that when he translated the name, he got filthy snowman, which he felt wasn't really an eye-catching headline. So instead, he came up with another name, a name that stuck. In 1925, a member of the Royal Geographical Society named N.A. Tombasi would report an encounter he had near the Semu Glacier at approximately 15,000 feet. He wrote that he had seen a creature resembling a human that was walking upright. For about a minute and from a distance of around 200 to 300 yards, he watched this creature moving around in the snow. 2 hours after this strange sighting, Tombasi and the team were descending the mountain when they stumbled upon strange prints. Prints that he described being very similar to human footprints, that were clearly, in his opinion, made by a biped. The Semu Glacier was also the location of another sighting in the autumn of 1937. British Army officer John Hunt reported finding footprints at the Semu Gap near the Semu Glacier, which were thought to have been made by a pair of Yetis. This report from Hunt got little more attention when he went on to lead the British expedition to Mount Everest in 1953, which was the first confirmed successful expedition to Everest. In June 1944, mountaineer C.R. Cook, accompanied by his wife Margaret and a team of porters, came across large bipedal footprints embedded in soft mud just below the Singalila Ridge. When asked what these prints could be, Cook was reportedly told by the porters that the prints were of the wild man. The creature appeared to have come up through bushes on the steep hillside from Nepal, crossing the track before continuing up to the ridge. Cook decided to take a few photographs of the prints. In his account of these prints, he described them as larger than any normal human foot, and he had placed his wife's sunglasses next to them to illustrate their size. Then, in 1951, mountaineer Eric Shipton would attempt to summit Mount Everest. A veteran of World War II, Shipton had a passion for climbing and exploring uncharted territories. It was something he had done extensively before the war, becoming one of the first climbers to reach the summit of Comet in 1931, which at the time was the highest peak climbed. When returning from the war, Shipton decided to continue this passion, and he would even lead 2 reconnaissance expeditions to the southern side of Everest in 1951 and 1952. The insights and findings gathered by Shipton and his team during these 2 explorations would eventually pave the way for the 1953 expedition to Mount Everest by John Hunt, where Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay became the first to reach the summit of Mount Everest. During one of Shipton's own expeditions, though, they would find something odd. During the initial expedition in 1951, at an elevation of around 20,000 feet, Shipton and his team found large footprints in the snow. They would take 3 photographs of these footprints. One that showed the track, the other 2 showed one of the prints where they had included a pickaxe and a boot for scale. Now known as the Shipton footprint, these photos are argued by some as being the best evidence of the Yeti's existence. Let's now fast forward a bit to April 2019, when the official account of the Indian Army would publish a picture of what was purported to be Yeti tracks in the snow. The post, which as of the making of this video is still up, said that for the first time an Indian Army mountaineering team has sighted footprints of Yeti. These footprints were said to measure 32 inches by 15 inches and was seen close to the Makalo base camp on the 9th of April 2019. Unlike the previous accounts and reports of footprints in the snow, this post sparked more mockery than anything else, unsurprisingly in the days of social media. Many people would respond with disbelief, others would make fun of the post, and others still argued against the post, stating that the Yeti have already been debunked by science. Aside from the Yeti being a prominent figure in Himalayan folklore, there are also relics that certain monasteries in Tibet were and are supposedly in possession of. Relics that are said to be from a Yeti. According to legend, 2 specific artifacts were gathered by Lama Sangwe Dorje, the founder of the oldest monastery in Khumbu at Pangbosh. According to the legend, he had retreated into a cave to meditate. During this time in solitude, he was assisted by a Yeti who provided him food, water, and fuel. The legend says that over time, this Yeti would become a disciple of Buddhism, and when the Yeti had died, its hand and scalp would be collected and brought back to the monastery, where they remained as sacred relics, occasionally paraded around the village as part of a fertility ritual. But then, in the midst of all the Yeti craze, Western explorers would find out about these relics. An oil businessman named Tom Slick had an interest in cryptozoology and would fund many expeditions to investigate many of these creatures. Expeditions that included looking into the Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot, the Trinity Alps giant salamander, and the Yeti. In 1956, he would announce plans for a trip to capture the Yeti. These plans had to be scrapped when the local government refused permission. In 1958, an explorer named Peter Byrne traveled to the Himalayas to look for evidence of the existence of the Yeti. During this expedition, he stayed at the monastery and was reportedly shown what appeared to be a large, mummified hand, possibly belonging to a primate. After he returned from his expedition, Byrne would report this find to a primatologist at the Royal College of Surgeons Hunterian Museum named William Osman Hill, and of course to Tom Slick. All of them wanted to study this hand, but Byrne told them that they would never be allowed to remove the hand, as it was believed that the removal of the hand would bring disaster to the temple. Of course, they did not care about this, and soon a plan to obtain the hand for further study would be formed. The theft would be completed in 1959. After stealing the pieces, Byrne would replace the stolen bone fragments with human bones and then rewrapped the hand to hide the theft. He later claimed that this was done as a bargain with the lamas at the monastery, as he was only allowed to remove a finger if he replaced it. There's even one account that claims that Byrne got the monks drunk before he stole the bones. According to Byrne, once arriving in India, he was ordered to make his way to Calcutta, where he met with actor James Stewart. From there, Stewart would help smuggle the hand out of the country. He managed to bypass security by concealing the artifact in his wife's lingerie case and was able to smuggle it into the UK at Heathrow Airport. Following the theft, the hand was examined by Dr. Hill. Initially, he would conclude that it had hominid characteristics, but he would revise this in 1960 after further studies made him conclude that the fragments were a closer match with a Neanderthal. On the 27th of December 2011, tests would reveal that a finger belonging to this hand contained human DNA. From what I was able to find when looking into this, it does appear that the hand have since been returned to the monks at the monastery. The Yeti hysteria had gotten so out of hand that the American embassy in Kathmandu, Nepal would issue a US government memo in December 1959. This memo highlighted what hunters could or could not do if they were to come face to face with the creature. Any evidence of this creature had to be submitted to the government of Nepal. The British government did not issue the same memo. In 1960, Sir Edmund Hillary, renowned for being the first climber to reach the summit of Mount Everest, led an expedition that was focused on not only climbing the mountain, but also searching for this elusive creature. During this expedition, Hillary would travel to remote temples which they had heard held scalps from a Yeti. Hillary would see one of these at one of these temples, and he wanted to bring it back for further study. To facilitate this, he agreed to provide compensation in the form of a donation to both the monastery and the local school. For as long as there have been stories of strange creatures in the world, there have been those who propose explanations for what those creatures could be. Explanations that usually involve something more ordinary. In the case of the Yeti, the most common theory is misidentification. According to some, the origin of the Yeti can be traced to a combination of factors, such as Sherpa folklore and the misidentification of animals like a bear or a yak. For instance, a mountaineer named Reinhold Messner proposed in his 1986 autobiography, My Quest for the Yeti, that the creature known as the Yeti were actually sightings of either a Himalayan brown bear or a Tibetan blue bear. This does seem to be backed up by studies of some of the fur, bone, and skin that have been brought back. Scientific studies that used mitochondrial DNA sequencing to examine 24 Yeti samples have found that these samples were that of a bear, such as the Himalayan brown bear, the black bear, and the Tibetan brown bear. They also found samples that belonged to other creatures, such as a tooth that was from an animal in the dog family, or hair that was found to belong to a horse. Another theory regarding the Yeti, or more specifically the footprints that have been found in the mountains, comes from mountaineer Michael Ward. In an article in the 1999 issue of Alpine Journal titled The Yeti Footprints, Myth and Reality, he proposed that the footprints were made by humans who had deformed feet. His theory was based on the remote location of many of the villages where many of these people resided. These communities lived far away from even the most basic medical facilities, and as such, they probably wouldn't receive care on any abnormalities, meaning that if someone was born with deformed feet, they would probably have that deformity their entire life. He also goes on to write that it is possible for Himalayan inhabitants to walk in the snow barefoot for large periods. He argues that he has seen this himself during at least 2 different scientific expeditions conducted in the area. During one of these expeditions, the team had met with a Nepalese pilgrim who had stayed with them for about 14 days at an elevation of 15,300 feet and above. According to Ward, this pilgrim did not wear shoes or gloves during this entire time. Instead, he walked in the snow and on rocks on his bare feet without any evidence of frostbite. One of the more interesting theories regarding the Yeti is the suggestion that the creature might be a present-day specimen of an extinct species of giant ape, or even a relative of this giant ape. Though scientists have argued against this, as they believe that this creature was quadrupedal, while the Yeti is said to be bipedal. Though I should point out that within the folklore, there are 2 different kinds of Yeti. One that walks on all 4s and one that walks on 2, which many view as a counter-argument. As far as science is concerned, the Yeti does not exist. Instead, they conclude that the creature was a bear that over time became the Yeti when stories, sightings, and local folklore merged and became this classic cryptid. There are some theories that suggest that the Yeti does exist, but it just doesn't want to be found. And while that is very intriguing, especially given the remote location it's said to reside in, we still haven't found any real evidence beyond a couple pictures. The area where it lives, or is said to live, is remote and isolated, inaccessible. And while there are some people who live there, it is the perfect place for a creature to hide if that creature does not want to be found. Even if we go by the scientific conclusion that the Yeti does not exist, it's still a highly intriguing story. An example of how nature, culture, and myth can help shape a legend that many people still believe is out there, somewhere, hidden in the snowy peaks of the Himalayas.